Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that really touches all of us, probably quite often, actually. What is going on with grocery prices here in the U.S.?
It's a big one. And we've gathered some, well, pretty interesting sources to try and unpack it.
Yeah, we've got news articles for the current situation, a case study that looks at, the details of supply chains.
There's also an FTC report, the Federal Trade Commission, which is quite eye-opening.
And even an academic paper that really, really digs into the dynamics of food price inflation. Lots to cover.
Exactly. We know you're likely feeling it, right, by
Yeah,
the
yeah.
time you're at the checkout. Maybe wondering why things cost what they do.
hmm
So our goal here in this deep dive is to, let's say, go beyond those surface headlines,
Right.
pull out the important insights from all these different sources.
And hopefully give you a clearer picture of all the different forces shaping what you end up paying. Okay, so let's start with the picture right now. Grocery inflation has been this huge story, but it seems the actual rate of increase for food at home prices has slowed down quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, as of September 2024, the annual increase was around 1%.
Only 1%, which is, well, it's surprisingly close to where things were before the pandemic really shook everything up. That's coming from the Consumer Price Index data.
It is. But to really get that 1%, you kind of have to remember the roller coaster we've been on,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
We saw that really sharp, rapid climb during the pandemic. Grocery inflation hit 13.5% year over year back in August 2022.
13.5. That was a massive jump.
Huge.
Now, here's something I found really interesting. Back then, September 2022, your groceries were actually getting more expensive faster than eating out was.
Right. And faster than overall inflation, too.
Exactly. But fast forward to last month, October 2024, and that whole situation has flipped.
Completely reversed.
Now, the food you buy to eat at home, those prices are going up slower than overall inflation, but eating out, that's getting pricier faster.
And the USDA Economic Research Service, they have projections, right?
They do? What are they saying?
Well, for 2024 overall, they're expecting like a 1.1% increase for groceries, so food at home,
Okay, very small.
but a more noticeable 4.1% jump for food away from home, restaurants, cafes, that kind of thing.
4%, okay. And looking further ahead.
For 2025, they see both slowing down a little. Groceries maybe 0.8%, eating out around 3.1%.
So things are cooling off rate-wise for groceries?
Yes, but, and this is important, the level of prices is still much higher than it was. That baseline cost is, well, it's still a big factor for household budgets, even if the rate of increase isn't as steep anymore.
That's a really good point. It's not just how fast they're rising, but how high they've gotten and stayed.
Exactly.
So, okay, basic economics, why do prices change? It comes down to supply and demand, right?
Fundamentally, yes.
Let's tackle the supply side first. What makes it more expensive to, get the food produced and onto the shelves?
Well, looking back at 2022, those big price jumps had some pretty clear causes on the supply side.
Wait, what?
Remember the avian influenza outbreak?
Yeah.
That hit egg and poultry prices hard, made them much more expensive because supply dropped.
Right, I remember egg prices going crazy.
And then there was the war in Ukraine. The USDA pointed this out. It had these broader ripple effects, especially through energy costs.
Yeah,
And high energy costs just make everything else more expensive to produce and transport.
absolutely. And transportation itself, that's a bigger piece than you might think.
It is. The USDA figures it's about, what, 5% of the cost of groceries?
Around 5%. And those costs, transportation costs, they jumped over 27% between 2019 and 2023.
Wow, 27%.
Yeah, that increase actually outpaced the rise in food prices themselves during that period.
And that academic paper, the food price inflation one, it really confirmed this, found a direct link. Rising fuel prices, higher costs for shipping containers.
Directly led to higher food prices, especially for food at home.
Yeah. And it's not just the direct cost either, it's also about disruptions.
Ah, the supply chain chaos we heard so much about.
Exactly. Both the FTC report and that paper highlighted this. They use something called the Global Supply Chain Pressure Index.
Okay.
And when that index is high, meaning lots of disruption, it creates uncertainty. Businesses worry about getting ingredients or products.
So they react?
They often react by raising prices, partly because maybe their own costs go up if something's scarce, but also sometimes just anticipating problems. Or maybe they hold more inventory just in case, and storing that extra stock costs money too.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's the supply side costs going up, disruptions causing issues. What about the other side, demand? What influences how much we're willing to pay?
Well, the food price inflation study had a really interesting finding here. It suggested that demand-side pressures played a bigger role in food price increases from 2020 to 2023 than they typically had in past decades.
Really? Why was that?
One key thing seemed to be the anticipation of shortages.
Like people worrying they wouldn't be able to find stuff.
Exactly. The study saw a link between spikes in Google searches for words like scarcity and actual increases in demand.
So worrying about shortages actually made people buy more, like precautionary buying.
It looks like it. Kind of a self-fulfilling thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The fear of scarcity can, well, sort of drive up demand and maybe even contribute to scarcity.
That better stock up just in case feeling.
Uh,
I can definitely see that happening.
mhm. And then if you look specifically at eating out, food away from home,
Yeah.
higher prices for energy, diesel fuel, refrigerated trucks, those tend to correlate with rising menu prices too.
Why is that?
The researchers think it might be because those costs are often tied to the overall health of the economy.
So if the economy is doing well, energy prices might be up, but people also have more money to spend.
And they tend to eat out more often, which pushes up demand in restaurants. That's the theory anyway.
Okay, so big forces, supply costs, demand willingness. But food doesn't just magically appear. There's a whole journey, right? Lots of players in the middle.
Oh, definitely. The intermediaries, they're crucial, as that Charlotte Urban Institute article pointed out.
Who are we talking about here?
Everyone between the farm gate and your shopping cart, essentially.
Hmm.
Farmers themselves, brokers connecting buyers and sellers, processors turning raw stuff into, say, cereal or canned soup,
Wholesalers, distributors.
wholesalers, retailers where you actually buy it. Most farmers aren't selling directly to us. They rely on this whole network.
And it sounds like the big grocery chains are getting really involved in managing this whole complex system now.
They are. That Accelerated.Global case study found that the major chains are doing a lot of their core demand and supply planning centrally, often in-house.
Using technology.
Yeah, lots of automations, huge operation. These big chains might have like over 100 people just focused on forecasting demand and managing supplies. And they're increasingly using these roles called vendor replenishment planners, or VPRs.
VPRs, what do they do?
Their job is basically to make sure the right amount of product is on the shelf at the right time. Trying to cut down on both empty shelves and having too much stock sitting around. They work really closely with the chain's biggest suppliers to fine-tune everything.
Sounds like technology must be key. That CLA article talked about AI, artificial intelligence, being used more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Using cameras maybe to monitor shelves in real time, getting much better at predicting what people will buy.
Demand forecasting, yeah.
Optimizing delivery routes for trucks to save fuel and time, even using AI to help reduce shrink.
Shrink. That's theft and spoilage, right? Stuff that gets lost or wasted.
Exactly. Any inventory loss that ultimately costs the business money, which can feed into prices.
And what about those electronic price tags you see now? Electronic shelf labels, ESLs.
They definitely make it easier for stores to change prices quickly. But the argument is they also help with efficiency, maybe saving labor costs for changing paper tags and helping staff fulfill online orders more quickly too.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit. That FTC report you mentioned earlier raised some pretty pointed questions about competition, didn't it? Especially during all those supply chain problems.
It did. It highlighted a real difference in how those disruptions hit retailers. Smaller grocery stores often had a much tougher time getting the supplies they needed compared to the really big chains.
And the report hinted that maybe some larger companies benefited.
Well, it suggested that some larger firms might have used the general environment of rising costs as a sort of cover, an opportunity to increase their own profit margins.
How did they find that?
They looked at the revenues of food and beverage retailers compared to their total costs. And they saw that this gap, basically profitability, increased in 2021 and then again in the first 9 months of 2023.
So even while prices were going up for consumers, these companies' profits were potentially growing too.
The data suggests that was the case for some, yes. The report also noted that sometimes larger buyers were able to use their sheer size, their leverage,
Their buying power.
to get better deals or secure more inventory from suppliers during the pandemic, which could put smaller competitors in a bind.
And this ties into a bigger theme, doesn't it? Corporate consolidation. Carolina Forward highlighted this.
Yes, this idea that over time, fewer and fewer giant companies are controlling more and more of the food system.
Which naturally means less competition.
Less competition. Think about coffee. Just 4 big companies dominate the market. Or meat packing, the big 4 process a huge chunk of the beef in the U.S.
And when you have less competition,
It just makes it easier for those dominant players to keep prices high. There's less pressure to undercut each other.
And that's happening in grocery stores themselves, too, the retailers.
Seems so.
Hmm.
The top 5 grocery retailers now control almost half the entire national market. That's pretty concentrated.
Okay, so bringing it back to the consumer, even though that headline inflation rate has slowed down, it sounds like people are still really feeling the pinch.
Oh, absolutely. That 84.51 degrees survey data made that crystal clear. People are still very concerned about grocery prices.
And spending more.
Yeah, the average weekly grocery spend per household is still way higher than it was before the pandemic hit.
Even though wages have gone up somewhat.
Wages have generally gone up faster than grocery inflation over the last 4 years on average. But despite that, groceries remain a top financial worry for a lot of people. The cumulative impact is real.
It makes you wonder how stores actually decide on the price for, say, a can of beans versus a loaf of bread. That Reddit discussion we saw had some interesting tidbits.
Yeah, it suggested it's not simple. It's like these dynamic systems tracking tons of factors.
Competitor pricing is obviously huge.
Definitely. And strategic markups.
Hmm.
Maybe keep staples like milk or bread relatively low loss leaders, sometimes to get you in the door.
While making more profit on other items.
Right. And stores use different overall strategies too. You've got EDLP, everyday, low price. Think Walmart maybe. Consistent lower prices across the board.
Or the opposite.
Or high-low.
Hmm.
Higher regular prices, but lots of frequent sales, promotions, buy one, get one free deals,
Hmm.
trying to create excitement and draw you in with those specials. Different ways to play the pricing game.
Okay, last piece here. Let's just briefly zoom out. This isn't just a U.S. issue, is it?
Not at all. That article on rising food costs and global food security really puts it in perspective. High food prices are a worldwide challenge.
And it hits some harder than others.
Disproportionately affects the poorest people globally. They spend such a huge percentage of their income on just basic food.
Because you still have to eat, even if prices go up.
Exactly.
Mm.
Food demand is pretty inelastic, especially for staples. You can't easily cut back on rice or bread the way you might cut back on, say, going to the movies.
Yeah.
So price hikes hit those with the least cushion the hardest.
And certain groups are even more vulnerable.
Yes. The research shows female-headed households often face greater hardship.
Mm.
And in rural areas, households that mostly buy food rather than sell it are more exposed than those who sell crops.
And for whole countries.
Low-income countries that have to import a lot of their food are the most vulnerable when global prices spike.
Wow. Okay, so if we try and sort of wrap this all up, what are the main takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, it's definitely complex, isn't it? Grocery prices are shaped by this real mix of things.
You've got the supply side, the cost to grow, make, and ship food, plus those unpredictable disruptions.
Then you've got the demand side, our willingness to pay, how worried we are about shortages, the overall economy.
Plus the structure of the industry itself, all those intermediaries, and this trend towards fewer, bigger companies. Consolidation.
And underlying all of it, you have
Yeah.
global conditions, energy prices, weather events. It's all connected.
And crucially, even though inflation rates have slowed,
The level of prices, that cumulative effect of the past few years, is still hitting wallets hard. The sticker shock hasn't entirely worn off.
right? So here's something to leave you thinking about. Considering all these different pressures we've discussed, supply chains, competition, consumer demand, global factors, what do you think is the single most critical thing? The area that most needs attention if we want to ensure affordable, stable access to food for everyone in the future?
Is it making supply chains tougher, more resilient? Is it boosting competition in the food industry? Or maybe something else entirely?
Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.